Well, I'll speak on that topic, actually. What was it again?
Waking up from the dream of waking life.
Okay. That's borderline esoteric. So, that metaphor of waking from a dream is, of course, used very often by spiritual teachers for obvious reasons. When we're sleeping and dreaming, we don't think we're dreaming. Sometimes we dream that we're dreaming, but then we wake up within the dream. But basically, when we dream, we think this is real. And then we wake up and see, that was just a dream. This is more real. So, obviously, hundreds and thousands of spiritual teachers through time have jumped on this image, this metaphor for obvious reasons. And we can see that in general, when there is a type of, you could say, existential or dialectic tension, where one realizes that the world as I see it now, as I experience it, is not everything, that is what motivates someone to seek something higher. And this is true not only in spiritual knowledge or Krishna consciousness, it's true even in the realm of science. After all, there are simple people in the world that do things in a somewhat inefficient way, and they think we've always done things this way, and that's it. Or they see the world in a particular way, and they've always seen the world that way, and they have no curiosity. The world is simply that as it presents itself to us. So this is green and that's blue, and so on. I add one more point here. You can see how if you live in a society where everyone agrees and everyone thinks the same way, there will not be much impetus to think differently. That's why, for example, you could say there's more interest in other cultures, perhaps in Copenhagen or Aarhus or Paris or London than there might be in some remote village, although let's not underestimate remote villages. But still, we can see in general in the world that when people have contact with other cultures in cities, because there's immigration, won't talk about that, but because let's say it's a port, like take New York City. New York City became a commercial trading center hundreds of years ago. And when Europeans came, they tended to come to Boston or to New York. And so when you see another culture, you get the sense of culture. You become more objective. For example, if everything in the world was painted the same color, you would have no sense of color. As soon as there are two different shades, two colors, then your brain starts to understand that colors are relative. There's this color and that color. If every sound on earth was exactly the same note, the same pitch, you would have no sense of melody, no sense of harmony, no sense of that a particular note is a note. Doe, a deer, a female deer, and so on. Anyway, Ray, and you all know that song, right? I hope you all know that song. So when there's variety, you begin to understand the notion of a category in which there are various items. So that, for example, if you live in a city where people come from other countries and you're exposed to different cultures, you begin to get the notion that my own culture may be simply a type of culture. Otherwise, if all you know is what you and everybody else around you does, then you just think this is reality. You don't even think that this is our culture. You just think this is life. And so it's a plus and a minus, because on the one hand, when everyone does things the same way, there's solidarity, there's community, and so on. But there's also a danger of dullness, stupidity, and so on. So, in any case, if someone looks at the world and thinks, well, maybe there's more to the world than I see, then science begins, or philosophy begins, or theology begins, a search for God. In any case, if someone just takes the status quo as it is, no matter how bad it is, go down with the ship, then the brain doesn't really work. So, whenever we have words like waking up from the dream of being awake or something like that, I think as a reflex, almost like what they say, a knee-jerk response, like when the doctor hits your leg and your knee and your leg goes out. I think even as, let's say, as spiritual practitioners, we automatically think we're talking about other people. Because all of our analogies, all of our points of reference are based on the assumption that we know and they don't know. Which is very comforting, in a way. But what if we apply that to ourselves? What if we actually apply that to ourselves? What if, I don't mean to relativize all of our knowledge of Krishna. We actually, by Prabhupada's mercy, we do know a lot. But still, we may not know as much as we think we know, in some ways. And so, for example, you read these articles in Back to Godhead magazine about how I joined the Hare Krishna movement. And usually, it's some variation on, I was looking for God, or I was looking for something more, and then I, climbed up on top of a telephone pole and someone had left a Back to Godhead magazine there or something. Anyway, so if we look at, is that absolutely necessary? That noise? If we look at the 6 Goswamis, were considered the greatest devotees of Lord Chaitanya, and they were actually searching for Krishna. They were searching for Krishna. So, it's not that we were searching for God and then we joined the Hare Krishna movement. That may be true, but the point is, we're still searching, but we have a roadmap. Prabhupada gave us a roadmap. So now,
it is. He has to blend something. He said he'll be as quick as possible. I'm sorry.
That's all right. They say plan ahead. It's a good thing he didn't blend it before the class, because that might have... Anyway. Good planning. So, the point is that Prabhupada explained what God is and gave us sort of a preliminary but convincing experience of what God is. And we also have a process to get there. I guess you follow the yellow brick road in a sense, but we are still searching. So if you think of repetition itself, anyone that wants to become good at something, whether it's athletic or musical or whatever, they practice. So for example, an accomplished musician can just play and they don't have to think about it. Or an athlete, let's say in a boxing match or in a soccer game, they know what to do. They don't have to think about it. So it's very interesting because the result of, and we have the word sadhana, which means practice, as in spiritual practice. That's actually a more recent word, maybe in the last many hundreds of years. In the Bhagavad Gita, the word Krishna uses is not sadhana, but adhyasa. Abhyasa, which means the same thing. That's just the word Krishna uses. Literally repetition. So when you repeat something over and over again, you get good at it, and you can do it without thinking, but the problem is you can do it without thinking. And so when we think about spiritual practice, and I can do this without thinking, I do this without thinking, So this combination of having a spiritual practice, which we do over and over again, so we can do it without thinking, which is not always a good idea, and the fact that we are convinced that we have the highest truth, and that our victory is inevitable. If you put all these things together, it can lead to an amazing amount of dullness, actually, and sort of not thinking. And not because there's something bad about us, because of our human nature. And so it seems to me the real challenge for any spiritual movement, and certainly ours, because we are convinced that, in a sense, the world depends on, in a sense, that not that all the planets will explode if we don't chant Hare Krishna, but this is, we are convinced on reasonable grounds, the highest knowledge, not the only knowledge, but the highest knowledge, and the world really needs this. And so, if you look sociologically, there's a fine line between, let's say, a movement and a religion. So, in sociological terms, at what point do you cross a line and instead of being a movement, you're just a church or a religion? At what point do you cross the line the other way, and instead of merely being one of many religions, you actually become a movement? What are the characteristics? And what grade do we get? What's our score on that? It's, if a sociologist looked at us, would they say this is a church or a religion, or would they say this is actually a movement? What would an objective social scientist say?
It's a church or religion.
Well, I'm not answering. I wouldn't presume to answer. I'm just. But what I mean to say is, I think it's absolutely essential that those of us who are trying to practice and promote spiritual life, that we be thinking people. Prabhupada declared his purpose in coming to this world, or to America actually, or to the West, was to create or reconstitute a class of Brahmins, or persons who could teach society. So Brahmins are very thoughtful people. Hare Krishna. It happens in the best of sampradayas. So, a Brahmin, a thoughtful person, because there are things for example, we need to monitor our own spiritual life. Am I really progressive? Have I reached a cruising altitude? Because if you think about it, people approach Krishna or God for different reasons. One of them is suffering, right? Arto jigyasur artarti gyani cha bharatarshava. So one of the reasons people approach Krishna is arto, they're suffering. So if my motive in approaching Krishna or God is that I'm unhappy, so I'm praying to God to become happy, which even Narottam Das Thakur has a song where he says, Nityananda Koro Sukhi, I'm unhappy, so make me happy. So, but then if I become happy, let's say I take up my spiritual life and I stop doing really stupid things. I just do sort of moderately stupid things in life, but not like really stupid things. And I have a spiritual life, and I chant Hare Krishna, I'm pious, and so I'm not suffering as I did before. So in a sense, that relief from suffering, it may produce gratitude, it may produce a type of apathy, because, okay, I got what I wanted, and I'll keep chanting Hare Krishna to make sure the pain doesn't come back, but basically I got what I wanted, and so everybody's happy. If we approach Krishna for knowledge, let's say we came to this movement because we were searching for knowledge, what is God, then we get the knowledge. We read Prabhupada's books, we get this knowledge, but then one can think, okay, I was curious, now I know, so I can just sort of get back to my normal life. It's interesting because that's why in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna distinguishes between the jigyasu and the jnani, namely the curious person and the one who really has knowledge. And so, or someone may want money, as Krishna says, artarti, which also can mean simply pursuing one's self-interest. So, let's say one discovers Krishna, this wonderful knowledge of Krishna, and then one tries to practice it, but how do we actually remain motivated? Because at a certain point you can say, okay, that's good enough for now. I have this basic knowledge and I'm not really suffering that much, and so I'm just going to live my life and do little spiritual stuff, and I'm okay. So if you think about it, that motivation, that desire to keep pushing, that desire to keep pushing until I actually reach Krishna, requires a very serious, almost an extraordinary amount of sincerity. An extraordinary amount of sincerity. To, okay, I'm not suffering terribly, and I now know what God is, so then what's your motivation? As far as becoming really Krishna conscious and loving God, that'll happen eventually if I just chant. And it's interesting, people who have become sort of, what's the word? You could say...
Complacent?
Complacent's a good word. Yeah, good word. Some people get sort of complacent about their own spiritual life in the sense that this is good enough, may also feel that way about other people. Because if I don't think it's that urgent for me to advance spiritually, I may not think it's that urgent for other people to advance. And therefore, as far as preaching, I may think that, well, we put our stuff out there for the public. They like it, don't like it, whatever. Life goes on. Eventually, prophecies will be fulfilled. So why worry about it too much? If we're presenting ourselves in a certain way, and the public is not beating down our doors, people aren't really coming, the movement's not growing, it's whatever. Prophecy will be fulfilled. It's very interesting because I can give an example from another religion, the Jesus movement, which became known as Christianity at a certain point, generation or two after Jesus. And it's interesting to see how people respond when their prophecies aren't fulfilled, like what happens psychologically in a human mind. If we look at the Jesus movement, it's obvious that it was an apocalyptic movement. The Greek word apocalypse, apa, Sanskrit, away, it means like the discovering or the uncovering. And so the apocalypse was this notion that human beings are wicked and God has had just about enough, and so he's going to just basically cancel the contract. He's going to, history as we know it is going to come to an end, and God will send a representative who's really mad or unhappy or not in a good mood. God is going to send one of his representatives, and people will be divided. Okay, everybody, line up. It's like the good people over here, the bad people over there, and the good people will be elevated, exalted. The bad people will be really messed up. They're going to be sent to hell or something like that. And God will basically reboot human history. God will again begin human history. So it's this very dramatic, violent event. And just before the time of Jesus, or around the time of Jesus, you could say, apocalyptic preaching really started to heat up in Israel. And the paradigmatic apocalyptic preacher, like you see those cartoons and magazines where some guy in a robe is walking down the street saying, repent, the world's going to end. I mean, you must have cartoons like that in Denmark. Denmark's funny, by the way, for cartoons. Famous for cartoons, satires on religions. Anyway, so...
Certain religions.
Yes. So John the Baptist But John the Baptist was like the classic apocalyptic preacher. You are all wicked, you are sinful, repent. God is going to punish you for your sins. Now what's interesting is, according to all the sources that we have, Jesus chose to take his, you could say, diksha, or chose to be initiated, baptized by John the Baptist, which tells you something about Jesus, that he chose this person to get his baptism in the Jordan River. Now, in the New Testament, to the extent, who knows what Jesus, there's that joke that Jesus goes back to heaven, he goes back to the presence of God, the Father, and God welcomes him and says, Jesus, just one thing. Could we go over this just one more time? Exactly what did you tell those people? So anyway, it's the idea that there's always been, there's for the last 200 years, there's been controversy about the historical Jesus, because after about, 1,800 years, someone finally noticed that different books of the New Testament give different accounts of the life of Jesus and different accounts of the life. So, people started to take that seriously after many centuries. And so that began this academic project of, trying to recover the historical Jesus. How much do we really know about Jesus? How reliable are these accounts and so on? Anyway, so in the New Testament, there's a scene where Jesus says to his followers, he assures them that before some of you die, you will see the apocalypse. So if we take that seriously, Jesus himself, who took baptism from John the Baptist, very apocalyptic. Jesus himself is saying the world's going to end. And his followers took that very seriously. We know that the followers of Jesus believed very strongly that the world was going to end any minute, like it could happen today. Tomorrow it could happen like at 9 o'clock tonight. It's very interesting. And that was a lot of the energy behind what they were doing. So, for example, Paul, in the New Testament, half the New Testament, roughly, is letters of Paul, Romans, Corinthians, and so on. Letters he wrote he was the first Christian GBC. And so, he was writing letters to his zone. Basically, so it's interesting. Someone wrote him a letter. We don't have the original letter, but we know from his answer what the letter was. Some guy wrote and said, should I get married? And of course, in those days, extended families, think Hridayananda Das Goswami, marriage was very entangling. And so Paul writes back, why go to all that trouble? The world's going to end. In other words, the world's going to end any minute now, so why take the trouble? So they really thought that. There was just one slight bump in the road, and that is it didn't happen. And so it's interesting to study the psychology, like what happens when your prophecy isn't fulfilled and you're committed, you have this religious community. And when I look at it, as a so-called historian, you can see a few things. Number one is they individualized the apocalypse. In other words, even if the world is not going to be destroyed right now, you are, because you're going to die and you're going to go to some horrible place. So they personalized, individualized the apocalypse because you can't deny you're going to die. That was like a very safe prophecy that you're going to die. So they did that. And also, they began to use language like the prophet, that it will be fulfilled in the fullness of time, And what's interesting about the fullness of time is that it's open-ended. You can't be wrong about that because, given millions and millions of years, eventually the world must be destroyed. So you can't go wrong if you say fullness of time. It's interesting because one's attitude towards that prophecy becomes passive rather than active. Rather than actively going out and trying to get the job done because it's going to happen, you just become passive and just sort of wait for it to happen. That, nothing we can do can really change anything, so let's just wait for the prophecy to act by itself. And so, if we look at that example of human psychology, and then think about the Hare Krishna movement, when Prabhupada was here, when Prabhupada was here, we actually had a serious expectation that we would see the world transformed because the movement was growing, it was powerful. And now, of course, the situation is different. If you study the history of all religions, they go through these cycles. I mean, the most powerful religions went through hard times. So that's normal. But to me, the real question is now, what is our attitude toward the vision that Prabhupada gave us? For example, Prabhupada said, this is practically a quote, that if we present Krishna consciousness appropriately, it cannot fail, in the sense that people will join, the movement will grow. Of course, it's very interesting. There's a corollary, there's a logical corollary, that if it's not growing, maybe you're not presenting it appropriately. So, but what is our attitude? The danger is, are we simply passive now? Do we really feel, do we believe that we can actively participate in transforming the world? That's really, it's something that can really be done, even in our lifetime. Or have we just kind of moved it over to that little box in our head, which is, it's a prophecy, it'll be fulfilled someday. If you say that it's a prophecy, it'll be fulfilled someday, so I'm not going to, work up a sweat over it, because then I'll have to change my t-shirt. Then it's comforting, because then you can't lose. It's like you can't fail. There's no risk, and you have the luxury of actually not thinking. And many people reach a certain age in life when thinking is just kind of a headache. I remember, I had wonderful parents. I had really, really wonderful, loving parents. But when I came home from college with all my ideas about civil rights and the war in Vietnam is bad, and I remember my parents used to say, "Stop! You're giving us a headache." They were really good people, but they just, they came from World War II and fighting against Hitler in Japan, and it was just a headache. So that's a challenge for us. In a sense, in order for us to challenge the public and say, why don't you try to do more, are we challenging ourselves? Because if we're not challenging ourselves very much, we don't really have the moral authority to challenge other people. And if we're not challenging ourselves, probably we won't challenge other people. We won't really get out there and preach because it feels inauthentic in a sense. It may feel inauthentic, like it doesn't feel right. I don't want to bother people because, which in a sense means that someone at least has integrity. It's someone's an honest person. But are we really challenging ourselves? Are we really thinking? Are we really, like Prabhupada, if you want to know the real Prabhupada, are we really tirelessly searching for some way to get through to people? Or have we just kind of concluded that it's not a good age, people don't really want this? Actually, one big leader just came out with a podcast saying that we should be like the Amish in America. That's German immigrants in America that still dress like a couple hundred years ago in Germany, and they've grown only by having a lot of babies. They don't really convert anyone or convince anyone, and they are a tourist attraction. So in Ohio and Pennsylvania, which is stimulates the economy. So really, it seems to me we have to do some real soul searching. How do we respond to the fact? How do we respond to a situation where we know we have this greatest gift, we know we have this greatest knowledge, and yet somehow or other we're not really persuading many other people that it's true? And of course, probably the most comforting and natural thing to do is to blame the public. It's their fault because we're presenting things in the best possible way, but they're just sort of willfully ignorant. And so we can just blame the public. Or, it's interesting, if you look at the life of Prabhupada, Prabhupada changed everything when he found he wasn't making headway. You know those little wind-up, like those little wind-up cars, like little car, and it hits the wall and just, and it basically goes like that until the battery runs out. And so we can just keep doing that, like a little mindless wind-up car, just keep hitting the wall of public indifference until our batteries run out and we move to Vrindavan and retire. Which is a sort of, anyway. So, if you look at Prabhupada actually tried to spread the Hare Krishna movement in India before he came to the West. I mean, he was really trying because his guru said to spread the movement in English. And so Prabhupada would write, he had this little Back to Godhead magazine. It wasn't even a magazine, it was just sort of like a little sheet. He did Back to Godhead, which would comment on current events. And he tried to give he gave lectures in English. And at a certain point, he made a very bold decision. He decided to leave India because in those days, it wasn't like nowadays where, the game plan is basically you go to IIT and then you leave India and, go to Europe or America. In those days, Indians didn't leave India, and for a long time, there were always some Indians, obviously, that traveled, but there was this heavy Hindu injunction against leaving India. There was the idea that you'll become contaminated if you leave India, because India was surrounded by countries where animals were killed, meat eating, and India, in a sense, did have a higher moral standard. And so it became this type of Hindu injunction that, stay in India. And then, of course, times changed. But still, Prabhupada, he decided to take his preaching to the other side of the world. To the other side of the world. Another dramatic thing was he didn't follow what his guru had done in terms of technical details. Obviously, he was serving his guru faithfully. But Bhaktisiddhanta had sent someone to London. And that's what everybody did. In those days in India, especially before World War II, London was the center of the world. So if you want to reach Western people, there's only one city you go to, and that's London. And yet Prabhupada sailed past London and went to America. And Prabhupada, there's a quote from Prabhupada, you can look it up in Veda Base, where Prabhupada says, if by changing my dress I can spread this movement better, then I'll do it. People may not be aware of that quote. It's not very popular. People prefer the quote where Prabhupada says, I won't change anything. Because it makes us look tougher, and it makes the West look lower. So, anyway. So that's the challenge to us. We have a real historical challenge. Prabhupada gave us this knowledge of the soul, that of our eternal identity beyond the body, of the actual identity of God, the nature of the spiritual world, the process of bhakti yoga, which is a scientific spiritual process to achieve enlightenment and pure love of God. We've received these greatest gifts, and to me, the real historical challenge is, my generation, your generation, are we able to actually become Brahmins? Because Brahmins doesn't mean, don't forget that Prabhupada said, let the neophytes stay in the temples and ring the bells. Hey, maybe I should tell you something. What's that?
Just please do go on.
So I think that's the real challenge for us. To what extent can we somehow receive from Krishna the intelligence? To what extent can we actually find the way to make this movement work in Denmark and everywhere else? That's the real challenge to us. And it's not easy, and if we accept the challenge, we risk failure. And of course, it's natural human psychology. It's natural human psychology that it's often tempting not to try, 'cause that way you can't fail. And yet that really is the challenge to us. To find a way to, and of course, it's not obvious, but the intelligence is there. Krishna is in the heart of everyone. That's our understanding. Krishna is in the heart of everyone. And if we connect with Krishna, if we really give ourselves to Krishna, we can receive the intelligence of how to do this. And I know in my own generation, I talked to so many devotees, Prabhupada disciples, who their great dream in life is to move to Vrindavan and retire. It's interesting, the only reason that they were saved is because Prabhupada didn't do that. So, I think we really have to transcend this. Prabhupada was result-oriented. Not in a selfish sense, not because he wanted to show off, not because he wanted to impress anyone, but because he had a mission. If you're a doctor and you're treating a patient, you're constantly checking the vital symptoms. You're constantly checking to see how your patient is doing. And that's what doctors do. If the patient's not doing well, then you try something else. You try something else. It's not like, well, this is a bona fide treatment. Yeah, but the patient's dying. Yeah, but that's the bona fide treatment. So again, anyway, that's a challenge to us. So any questions on these points? Yes?
I have a question about this, an answer that is often given to this dilemma of how do we conquer the world, is that, well, it's about purity. That if we're just serious and sincere enough, you know, we could, I can't remember the exact amount of days it would take, but like something like then within a week or 21 days or something, we could conquer the whole world.
But I think something's missing there in that explanation. That is that a big part of purity is really caring about other people. And so the type of purity in which one is indifferent to other people, or just, you know, let them eat kartals or something. It's in other words, that was, in fact, that's how the Bhagavad, you know, when you become pure, you care more and more and more about people. So, and you care so much about them that you're willing to try all kinds of innovative things to try to reach them. That's purity. If I see I'm not reaching people, it's not like, okay, I'm going to just go home and just do bhajan so I become more pure. To me, that's not a sign of purity. It doesn't seem to be working, because there are many famous bhajaniyas and kirtaniyas that don't seem to be coming up with, you know, new strategies. So that is purity. When we stop thinking about our own selfish interest, obviously we have to keep ourselves spiritually strong. We have to keep ourselves spiritually strong, but not self-indulgent. And we should keep ourselves basically strong in Krishna consciousness, but our attention, our interest should be focused on how we can help other people. That is purity. So to me, there's no difference between purity and truly dedicating yourself to the good of others and, you know, trying to find some way to reach those other people. Yes.
Krishna is the all-attractive.
Yes.
So purity would mean somebody who is able to deliver Krishna to others for their eternal benefit without adding and subtracting. Is it?
Yes, of course. We don't change it. However, again, if we don't distinguish between superficial details and the actual substance, then we think that the package is the food. You start eating the package. For example, we go out in public, we dress a certain way, we make a certain kind of music. That's just the package. And to think that Krishna, the only possible way that you can present Krishna is in a certain package, no, there are many kinds of packages. There are many kinds of packages, and so we can't forget the distinction that Rupa Goswami makes and the Prabhupada makes between the basic substance, the basic principles, which are unchanging, and the details, which are changeable. If we, foolishly exalt the details and think that they are, eternal principles, like how we dress and what style of music we make, then we've basically misunderstood the spiritual science, and we do not have the flexibility or the freedom to reach people. So basically, there's this concept, this conception of Vedic culture, which goes down to every little detail of external culture. So there's absolutely no flexibility. If the public doesn't like our presentation, there's nothing you can do. Because every last superficial detail suddenly has become an eternal principle, even if it's never described as such in any scripture, even if the acharyas have never described it as such. And we don't have the flexibility to be successful. Yes.
I was thinking, besides the sense of urgency and cohesiveness, what other characteristics are there for movement?
What are the what?
What other characteristics are there that defines movement, contrasted to a church?
Well, churches have outreach programs. They send food to Africa or something, so it's not that, and they preach. I think a movement, it's obviously a degree of mobilization. It's obviously, it's a community or society in which everyone is mobilized. Even in an army, there's only they say relatively, a minority of the army actually is firing weapons. There's cooks and drivers and mechanics and pilots and so many things. But still, everyone knows what they're doing. So when everyone comes together, because we are a religious community and we do our program, that's nice. But when the community understands that actually a central part of our own spiritual practice, not just one detail, but a central part, or the central part of our spiritual practice, is trying to reach other people. And we keep ourselves strong spiritually, we chant and so on, we meet together, we keep ourselves spiritually fit. But that's the mission. For example, in a good army, they have good food. Just like, for example, Google, I've heard that they have all these really good restaurants on the Google campus, and it's all free. Like the Google workers can just go to these really great restaurants, and everything is free, and there's all different kinds. And so, of course, you have to keep yourself healthy. But everyone understands at Google what the mission is. The mission is not eating. The mission is trying to, push forward the company, and so, and so that's really what it is. Of course, we keep ourselves fit. Of course, we take care of our families, but everyone understands the mission, and everyone's focused on the mission. And I'm not sure that really is the case at this time in many places. It's not about the mission. It's about a group of people here, there, this country, that country, just meeting periodically, just to, keep in touch with their own practice a little bit and see their friends. As far as the public, well, what can you do about them? Yes?
Maybe a little change of subject, but talking about the public, we have some new guests today.
Yes.
Maybe you could explain a little bit about it. We didn't have time to explain about the chanting of the Maha Mantra.
Sure. Who's new here? Hey, thanks for coming. The chanting is a universal process. It's chanting the names of God. It's found in actually every world religion. The idea that the name of God is God, that somehow by chanting the name of God, you are directly in touch with God. For example, just to give a few examples, in the Old Testament, it said that the first temple built by Solomon in Jerusalem is a temple to the name of God. That as God lives in heaven, the name lives in the temple. Even in Buddhism, you have mantras like, the divine name and so on, even in Buddhism. And so it's this understanding that Sri Kandarvika chanted so beautifully, that the name of God is actually an avatar. It's called Nam Avatar. It's actually a form of the divine. And yoga means connection. So when you chant that name, you're actually directly in touch with God. And it's by that contact. Because ultimately the purpose of religion or yoga or whatever, spiritual life, is not just to believe something. It's not just to believe a particular doctrine. Ultimately the goal is to come to a higher state of consciousness when you see the truth. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna gives great emphasis to seeing the truth, not simply believing it. Of course, as a philosopher would say, you can't know something but not believe it. And so obviously, believing something, you can't know something, like you have to believe something before you can know it. Like if, let's say, like a truck goes by and you say, I don't believe that a truck just went by, because maybe it just went by inside your living room. And you say, I don't believe a truck just went by. So if you don't believe it, you can't know it. You have to believe something to know it. And that's what Krishna says, that if you actually believe it, then you can come to know it. If I believe something, and it remains on the level of belief, it never comes to the point of knowledge, then it may not be true. Philosophers talk about these things. For example, let's say someone believes the world is flat. And so they believe it, but they can't really know it. It's not just saying, I believe it so much, but to know something is to actually directly experience it. As Krishna says, pratyaksha. So the purpose of chanting Hare Krishna, the purpose of Krishna consciousness is not simply to persuade someone to believe something. It's actually to give a direct experience. It to see the truth. And then when we see the truth, when we directly experience the truth, then we have real spiritual life. So the chanting, in this age, it's a very difficult age. It's very difficult in this age to practice spiritual life because obviously we live in a very materialistic world. And so chanting is very easy, it's very convenient, and you can sing, you can meditate, whatever you like, in any language. And we chant Hare Krishna. It's not a sectarian process, any name of God. But Hare Krishna is particularly enjoyable. So it's a very practical, easy way to come into direct contact with God. And it's actually by that contact we become purified. For example, let's say if a river has become contaminated, but then there's like huge amount of pure water that comes into the river, then it becomes cleansed. So, is that it? Any question? Yes.
I have a question about this, about principles and details. And how do we avoid going down a slippery slope? My wife has a background in the Pentecostal movement, and her mother, they weren't allowed to go to the cinema or play games or anything like that. And then now the Pentecostal movement is organizing poker nights and cinema trips and things like that. So,
what happened?
So that I'm wondering how do we avoid making the same mistake, you could say, or I don't know if it's a mistake, but how do we avoid going confusing principle and detail.
Well, sometimes, like a pendulum, sometimes if one becomes too strict, then it leads to indulgence. And even, I mean, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, yuktahara viharasya, that in moderation, recreation in moderation. I'm not saying I'm trying to send you all to poker nights and cinemas, but we should have a balanced life, serious spiritual practice. In any spiritual community or religious community in the world, it's I don't think it's really possible that like huge numbers of people will be very strict spiritual practitioners. I don't think that ever really happens in this world. You have if you look at historically at many religions, there's a first generation where everyone is very idealistic, but in the real world, there will be some people, hopefully, who are very strict spiritual practitioners. But even, for example, in raising children, we've had this experience that if you isolate children too much from the world, they don't develop any cultural antibodies. For example, you can have a religious school, we've experienced this, you can have a spiritual school where the children only hear about God and only have spiritual life, but then when they go out into the world, they can't deal with it. They're very easily seduced by everything. And that, for example, when, Pizarro, and he went to Peru, who went to Mexico? Cortez. When Hernan Cortez went to Mexico, the great conquistador, and also in Peru, actually, millions and millions of indigenous people died from European diseases because they had no antibodies. So the idea of the church may be that since people are going to movies anyway, why not do it in as a church event, so that way the church members can talk to each other about it and hopefully come to a type of wisdom about the movie. Like, what did you get out of it? What did you like? What didn't you like? And so they may think it's better for the church members to do that together, or they can somehow relate it to their religious path rather than just doing it like sneaking around and then, So I don't know so much about that particular group, certainly not in Denmark, but
But I was also thinking about this, principle detail discussion in terms of like for the ISKCON movement, like how do we decide what can be modified and what should remain, so that we don't like hollow out kind of the core.
Yes. I think the issue is that we have to be very clear on the goal. Let's say you're on a trip. Let's say you're driving from Aarhus to, I don't know, Paris. And so you stop along the way. So if you stop along the way, it takes a little longer to get there. But the real issue is, do you know where you're going? Are you really fixed on getting there? And so we don't give up any principles. And so if we have a common goal, people are at different spiritual levels. Some people from past lives have a great spiritual ability, and they can dedicate themselves a lot. Other people can't. And so that's natural. People are at different levels. The important thing is that everyone share the same goals. For example, when people take a yoga class, they always say, don't try to compete with the person next to you. The point is, there is a proper way to do a particular pose, let's say, and not everyone can do it perfectly, but at least everyone agrees on. And even if you can't do it perfectly, the fact that you're trying to do it, it moves your body in the right direction. So the principle would be that everyone do the best they can. Everyone be realistic and honest about what they can do and what they can't do, and then everyone do the best they can, and everyone shares the same ultimate goal, so everyone's moving in that direction, and so that we honor the right people. If we see someone that is able to practice at an advanced level, then we honor that person. So it's keeping the principles intact and then everyone doing the best they can. Yes?
Me, myself, I find it very difficult not to have some kind of focus on what's going on in the world and what's possible to happen in the future. Now you see all the nuclear weapons, and you're seeing all the fear, seeing all the tensions going on in the world, and you also hear Srila Prabhupada talks about a third world war is coming at some point. And you also read in the Shastras about Kali Yuga coming to a point where everything is just horrible, and it's not a nice place to be in. So I find it very difficult not to also have a focus and have this sense of urgency that this is actually is what's going on at the moment, and what can happen in the future, maybe in the near future. Not as like a doomsday, but actually we see the weapons.
Oh, they've been around for a while, yeah.
Yeah, but it's now in the past 100 years, it's become more.
Yeah, this world is a dangerous place. This world is a dangerous place. Really it is. And that should motivate us to come to higher consciousness. We do our best to help the world. We do our best to do our best in this world, but ultimately we don't really have control over those things. So yes, we should. Yeah, I think if you look at the geopolitical situation in the world today, it's enough to make anyone join the Hare Krishna movement. If they really think about it. Anything else? Yes.
Can you explain to us, according to Shastra, what is the list of eternal principles in Krishna consciousness, and what is kind of
Superficial?
Yeah, superficial.
Basic principles are things like finding a spiritual teacher, or guru is a Sanskrit word. But it simply means a spiritual teacher. It's like if you want to be a doctor, you've got to find a medical school. It's a simple thing. It's not some mystic principle. It's basic. If you want to learn something, find a teacher. So if one wants to learn spiritual life, one has to find a spiritual teacher. And our basic practices, like we chant Hare Krishna because transcendental names of God. We offer our food to Krishna as a sign of gratitude and reciprocation. We try to participate in spiritual communities because we all need community. Whatever community we chose, we know that's why our parents didn't want us hanging out with the wrong people, because whatever community we choose to be part of, that will have a dramatic effect on us. So when we choose a community, we're really choosing what we're going to be. And so we choose a spiritual community. And things like that. Studying sacred texts like the Bhagavatam. Basic principles. As far as other things, yes, the details, like you live in a particular culture, people dress a certain way, or they play certain musical instruments. Like this harmonium, for example, is a beautiful instrument, comes from Europe in the 19th century, and so. But somehow in Europe they moved on, but in India it's like super popular. And it's used a lot especially for religious music. So all those details, of course, are details. If you look at, for example, Christianity became a world religion, but it's not that all the Christians dress like Palestinians from 2,000 years ago. And so one could say, well, if you did dress like a Palestinian from 2,000 years ago, you would love Jesus more. But I don't think many people would be convinced by that. So it's really focusing on the powerful spiritual practices that actually bring us closer to Krishna. Anything else? Yes.
Is all religions from God?
In their best forms, I mean, for example, killing innocent people, I don't think comes from God. So, I think we can identify spiritual principles that come from God, such as compassion, love of God, love of other people, devotion, charity, and so on, self-control. And so, the extent to which we find those principles in a particular tradition, I would say to that extent it comes from God, and the extent to which in any tradition we find something else, then that may come from human beings.
Some of it may come from human beings.
Yeah, but there has to be a criteria, because if you think about it, it's not just like a historical claim, like, you know, was so and so the prophet, was so and so the avatar, was so and so this. It's because, in a sense, as Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita, whenever we feel true compassion, that comes from God, because Krishna is in our hearts, and so whenever someone feels higher sentiments, love, compassion, generosity, patience, and so on, those are gifts of God. So if we look at the religions of the world, we find in all of them that some people take the high road and some people take the low road. And so I would say in any religion, the people on the high road are following God, and the people on the low road are not really. The way I put it is God is not a religious fanatic, and so religious fanatics don't represent God.
Because sometimes because sometimes think about why there's not one religion for all human beings, because sometimes most of the time religions bring make tensions between many people.
Well, let's think about that. For one thing, there have been tensions and conflicts, you know, between many religions in history, but let's look, for example, at Europe, pagan Europe. How do you say pagan in Danish?
Hedensk.
Huh?
Hedensk.
Hedensk. Yes.
Like heathen.
Oh, yes. So if you look at pagan Europe, they didn't fight religious wars. I mean, the Romans weren't, you know, fighting to bring Jupiter to everyone. I mean, the Romans had their religion, and there was, even in, you know, in Roman culture, there was high and low religion. There were just sort of rituals, and, you know, doing rituals to try to get material things from gods. And there were also people who had a higher sense of devotion and monotheism and so on. But basically, I would say in pagan Europe, basically people did not fight religious wars. You know, they fought a war, they were very explicit. You know, it was for power, it was for wealth, it was for whatever, but it wasn't for religion.
Ego.
Yeah, ego, but they didn't, you know, both sides might pray to their gods for victory, but it was not a religious war. They weren't fighting to spread a religion. If you look at India, also, you don't find, really, let's say within the various traditions that today may be called Hinduism, you don't find, it's not very prominent, religious wars. If you look at the religions that come from the Middle East, the three religions that come from the Middle East, then, it's like you hit the jackpot. Then we start to see just constant religious wars. And it's very interesting because if you look at the geography and the climate of the Middle East, semi-arid or climate or even just desert climate, and so it tended to promote a type of tribal society. And so you have this, what you have is you have sort of like the tribal psychology being imposed on religion and God. So just as, if you look at the way tribes, they sort of fight, and it's, you see it in the Old Testament, it's very clear. You can see the sort of the sociology of tribal civilization. And then they impose that on religion. So it's like literally, my God can beat up your God. And so you have these, if you look at the Old Testament, if you look at all the three, what are called, Abrahamic religions, in the Old Testament, there's all kinds of genocide. And then, in the New Testament, not the New Testament, but then in Christianity, not only crusades and inquisitions and all kinds of fun things like that, but also, even if you look at the going back to the time when the church or the Roman Empire adopted Christianity, and the persecuted overnight became the persecutors. And then Islam is also impressive in its enthusiasm to violently spread the faith. And so if you look at these, it's interesting that all the major world religions only come from two parts of the world, actually. India and the Middle East. Because from India we get Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, which is very small, but and then, Judaism, Christianity, Islam come from the Middle East. And if you look at the... so the way I put it sometimes is that if all you knew about religion was the religions that came from India, would you say that religion has been the cause of most of the wars? You wouldn't say that. Or even if all you knew about religion was the religion of the classical world, pre-Christian Europe, you also wouldn't say that. And so what happens is people tend to be, how should I put it, there's a sort of a really bad habit, even among scholars, where when they say religion, what they really mean is Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And they just say religion. It's a very bad habit, even some scholars have it. So that's the story there. There was for example, the Roman emperors, they had a certain attitude toward religion. The attitude of the Roman emperors was that, or in general the Romans, was that divine power comes through many channels, and so they wanted to buy into all these channels. So the Roman emperor would actually give money to many different religions, including Judaism in Jerusalem, so that prayers, sacrifices could be performed on behalf of the emperor to get that divine power. So the Renaissance was an attempt to revive that older situation. If you look at Europe today, or in much of the world today, that old, you could say, pre-Christian understanding has returned to Europe. Europe has gone back to its original understanding, which is that divine power can come through many channels. So
but I think if there was one religion for all people, it would be less tension.
If everyone agreed on having one religion, it'd probably be good, but the only way you could get everyone to agree to that would be kind of, you'd probably have to massacre a lot of people. And of course there are some groups that think that's probably a good thing, so let's actually do it and unify the world. It's, even if you look at India, for example, what is called Hinduism, there were actually different groups because people have different understandings. And so to get everyone, I mean, I agree with you. Obviously, it would be a beautiful thing if you could have a planet that united with a common spiritual understanding. Yeah, that would be great. But as they say, the devil is in the details. You know, trying to actually get there. Also, because nowadays religions are they're really connected with things like family identity attachment. For example, people generally learn a religion from their parents or from their little community, and then following that religion and no other becomes part of their family identity, becomes an expression of their loyalty to their family. And if you in any way change your spiritual practices or religion, you are betraying your family, you're betraying your community. And so it's very interesting because if you, in contrast, look at the world of science. In the world of science, if you have a particular theory about something, like let's say medical science, and then if someone says, oh, so-and-so just discovered a cure for cancer, yeah, but that person, that person's Iranian and we're American, so I'd rather die of cancer than take Iranian medicine. I mean, people don't really say that. I mean, ultimately, even like you take all these countries, America, China, Europe, Iran, all these different countries, Russia, and even though there's so much political tension or even military tension, when it comes to science, everybody wants science. Even Kim Jong-un or something, that, remarkably rational and humanistic figure, it said, he wants all the latest gadgets from America. So, but that I think is the problem. You see that we live in a world in which religion is not seen as a spiritual science. It's not seen as an objective thing that you have to, just see what works. Like, as they say, the truth is what works. But it's so tightly connected to, tribal passions and your family and your community and your country and this and that. And so people it's very hard for many people to be objective about it. It's not like, let's say you want to buy some product, like a car. Okay, I'll drive the cars. This one gets better gas mileage. This one is, whatever. It's a question of how can we get people to be objective about religion and just see what works, where's the best knowledge. One thing which I think really poisoned everything, and I don't want to, I won't blame one person or another historically. I'm talking about people thousands of years ago, but I think the idea that if you choose a wrong religion, you'll go to hell forever, really made people a little nervous. Because what if you're choosing what restaurant to go to, and you find out actually there's only one restaurant in this city that serves good food. If you go to any other restaurant, you'll be poisoned and die immediately. If you believe that, then choosing a restaurant would become very serious. It would be like, oh my God. And what if there was no way to test the poison? You had to believe it. You just had. So, this type of extreme coercion. I mean, in order to try to spread your religion or your church, you demonize every other religion. You say that if you don't join our church, then the most horrible possible things, because actually God is the ultimate sociopath. I mean, what if you read in the newspaper? Do people read newspapers anymore? What if you read online? Sorry, I dated myself. What if you read that a man had, let's say, 10 children, and they didn't do exactly what he wanted, so he set them on fire, and he did something so that they wouldn't die immediately. He wanted them to, that would be too easy if they just died within 15 minutes. So he made sure they could suffer more. I mean, everyone in Denmark would think this is the biggest monster. And yet that's God, according to some theories. So in other words, take the behavior which is attributed to God, and then what if a normal human being acted that way? The person would be a monster. And actually, if God acted that way, God would be a monster. And so, presenting God as an evil monster, just so that you can, try to defeat other religions and scare people, it doesn't really help. It doesn't help. And so, it's a combination of these fanatical. This fanatical coercion, not allowing people to just think objectively. It's also a question of tying up religion to things like family loyalty and even nationalism or being true to your ethnic community. And under all those circumstances, people do not have the luxury of just making a reasonable choice. I would say most people in the world, psychologically, are not in a position to make a reasonable choice. So, and therefore, in the world of science and technology keeps advancing precisely because, more or less, they're objective. Whereas in the religious field, there's not much progress. And since the moral condition of the world depends on religion, not technology, because, Hitler loved technology, so it's not that technology makes you a good person. And so that dimension of life, that part of life which is supposed to make us good people, is almost totally irrational. It's almost totally subjective, irrational, unscientific. And that's actually the reason why the world is such a mess. Because there's not an objective approach to higher values. Humanism doesn't work, by the way. The agnostic or atheistic so-called intellectuals, they say, we don't need religion, let's just bring in social contract theory. We're all rational human beings. We're all rational human beings, and you can understand that if you steal, that may encourage other people to steal, so therefore we should all sign the social contract and all agree to be good persons, just as rational human beings. It doesn't work, because there's always lots of people that think, well, I think I can steal and get away with it. Because you see, powerful people that somehow have power, either physical power, financial power, political, social power, whatever kind of power they have, they're willing to take that risk. They think, okay, I'm going to grab power, I'm going to exploit other people, and I'm a gambling man. I'm willing, and if you tell me that if I do that, someone may do it to me, I will take the risk. The problem with social contract theory is that in social contract theory, which is sort of the humanistic substitute for divine morality, that in social contract theory, doing bad things is not really bad. It's not really objectively bad to kill someone, to rape someone, to steal. It's not actually bad. It just may not be in your self-interest. And so as soon as someone says, well, I think it is in my self-interest, and you can go take your social contract theory and throw it into the lake, you can't say anything. Because you don't accept God, you don't accept a soul, so you can't tell that person it's bad. All you can tell that person is it's not in your self-interest. And if the person decides, yeah, I think it is in my self-interest because actually I have the power to get away with it, which is what everyone thinks nowadays, then you have nothing more to say. So, and that's basically the situation in the world right now, and that gets to what you said about, and that is that morality, virtue, doing the right thing, not just raping, killing, stealing in the name of God or in the name of whatever. People are restrained. People are civilized by morality, and historically, moral systems come from religion and spirituality. That's just where they come from historically. Someone may not like that, but it's just too bad because that's what history tells us. And when you have a situation where in religion and spirituality it's extremely irrational, unscientific, then you get the world we have. So the solution is we actually need rational, objective, reasonable spirituality. And that's what Krishna consciousness is trying to provide. That's the whole point of this movement. And that's why I see it as perhaps our first duty, because first impressions are lasting, as they say. And so I think our first impression, how should I put it? The first impression that the public has of us should be that we are normal, rational people. We're not weird, we're not exotic, we're not like way out there. We are normal, rational human beings, and therefore it's okay to talk to us. So actually all these things are connected. They're actually all connected. Well, that was a long answer to your